Have you ever been judged by the clothes you wear? By the calluses on your hands or the weariness in your eyes? Have you ever felt the sting of being looked at but not truly seen? Of having someone's gaze slide right over you, dismissing your entire existence in a single, careless glance because you didn't fit their narrow definition of success? I have. For years I lived in the shadows, a ghost in my own life, deliberately invisible. But this is the story of the day the lights came on. It's the story of a wedding, a lie, and a single, devastating truth that shattered a world built on pride. It is the story of the day they finally saw me. The ballroom of the lakeside manor was a galaxy of shimmering lights and quiet, confident wealth. Crystal glasses chimed like tiny bells, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and freshly cut lilies. Men in impeccably tailored tuxedos spoke in low, rumbling tones about stock markets and mergers, while women in silk and satin dresses laughed, their diamonds catching the light and scattering it like captured stars. Into this world walked Alex. He paused at the grand, arched entrance, a small, dark figure against a backdrop of blinding opulence. His suit was dark gray, clean, and pressed, but the fabric was just a little too thin, the cut a decade out of style. It was the only suit he owned, the one he kept for funerals and now, it seemed, for weddings that felt much the same. He ran a hand over his short-cropped hair, a nervous habit, and pulled at the collar of his shirt, which felt unnervingly tight. He was here for his cousin, Mark. They had grown up like brothers, building forts in the woods and sharing secrets under the stars. But life, as it so often does, had carved different paths for them. Mark had followed his father into the lucrative world of corporate law, his path paved with privilege and expectation. Alex's path had been different. It had been steeper, lonelier, and etched with sacrifices Mark could never comprehend. He spotted his cousin across the room, a radiant smile on his face, his arm wrapped possessively around a woman in a breathtakingly white dress. This was her, Tiffany. The woman Mark had described in breathless, effusive emails as perfect, a goddess, the one, as Alex navigated the clusters of laughing guests, he felt the familiar weight of invisibility settle over him. He received polite, empty nods, the kind one gives to a waiter or a busboy. His worn suit was a uniform of a different class, and in this room, it made him a ghost. Alex. You made it. Mark's voice boomed, pulling Alex into a rough, backslapping hug. For a moment, the years melted away, and they were just boys again. But then Mark pulled back, his eyes darting around the room, already distracted by the social currents. Tiffany, honey, this is my cousin, Alex. Tiffany turned, and her smile, which had been so brilliant for the cameras, seemed to shrink and harden as her eyes swept over Alex. It was a swift, dismissive appraisal, from his scuffed but polished shoes to his slightly too short sleeves to the quiet humility in his posture. Oh, she said, her voice as smooth and cold as polished marble. Mark's told me so much about you. The words were right, but the tone was all wrong. It held a note of surprise, of disappointment, as if she were expecting someone, or something, else entirely. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Alex said, his voice even and calm. He extended a hand. Tiffany looked at it for a fraction of a second before placing her own delicate, perfectly manicured fingers into his. Her touch was brief, weightless, as if she were afraid of catching something. And what is it you do, Alex? She asked, her head tilted with feigned curiosity. Mark is so busy with his firm, I can't keep track of everyone's careers. Before Alex could answer, Mark jumped in, a hint of nervousness in his laugh. Alex is. He works over at the Naval Academy in Annapolis. In maintenance. The words hung in the air, heavy and defining. Maintenance. A simple, unambiguous word that, in this room, translated to janitor, handyman, labor. A wave of silent understanding seemed to pass through the small circle that had gathered around them. The polite smiles became tinged with pity. Tiffany's own smile widened, but this time it was sharp, predatory. Oh, how fascinating, she purred, the sound a low, cruel hum. It must be so inspiring to be around all those future leaders. A little piece of the glory must rub off, right? Alex felt a familiar tightening in his gut, a cold knot of anger he had learned long ago to suppress. He simply nodded. "It's an honor to serve," he said, the words carrying a dual meaning that was utterly lost on her. He saw Mark flinch at the cruelty in his fiancée's tone, but he said nothing. He just smiled weakly, a silent accomplice. The rest of the evening unfolded in a series of quiet humiliations. During the toasts, Tiffany, glass raised high, made a pointed remark about people from all walks of life being present, her eyes flicking to Alex for a brief, meaningful moment. When the buffet line opened, she found him standing alone and said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Please, Alex, get as much as you want. I'm sure it's a real treat for you." Each comment was a tiny, poisoned dart, and Alex felt every one. He endured it with a stoic calm that she mistook for weakness, for shame. He ate his meal in a quiet corner, watching the swirl of the party from a distance. He watched the powerful men, the decorated women, and the joyful couple at the center of it all. He was an observer, a shadow, just as he had been for the last 5 years. It was a role he had chosen, a penance he had accepted. But tonight, under the sting of Tiffany's casual cruelty, the role felt less like a choice and more like a cage. He was a virtuoso forced to play a child's tune, a lion masquerading as a mouse. And he was growing tired of the disguise. He didn't know that on the other side of the room, a man with the weight of the world on his shoulders was desperately searching for a ghost, a legend he believed was gone forever. A legend who was currently sipping lukewarm coffee, and being pitted for the quality of his suit. The universe, it seemed, had a flair for the dramatic. Hidden away on a secluded veranda overlooking the dark, placid lake, General Sterling stared at the screen of his encrypted satellite phone, his face a mask of grim frustration. The soft music and joyful laughter of the wedding reception felt a world away, an irritating distraction from the crisis unfolding thousands of miles from this manicured paradise. He was a man accustomed to command, his posture ramrod straight even when seated, his presence radiating an authority that needed no uniform to be felt. Tonight, he was a guest, the bride's father's old friend and colleague, but his mind was not on champagne or cake. It was on a submerged submarine, a geopolitical chessboard, and a missing king. "No, Senator, that's not an option," he said, his voice a low, controlled growl. "Sending in a SEAL team is a declaration of war. We need finesse. We need a ghost. We need someone who can walk through walls, someone they will never see coming." There was a pause as the voice on the other end crackled. The general's jaw tightened, the muscles flexing along his sharp jawline. "I am aware of the timeline. Every hour they hold that asset, our position weakens. The entire Pacific theater is on a knife's edge." He swiped a hand over his face, the picture of a man trapped in an impossible situation. He was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a position that placed the security of the nation squarely on his broad shoulders. And right now, those shoulders were bowed under an immense weight. A new stealth submarine, the USS Chimera, carrying revolutionary silent drive technology, had suffered a catastrophic systems failure in disputed waters and been captured by a rival power. It was an intelligence disaster of unprecedented scale. The world thought it was a training accident, a vessel lost at sea. Only a handful of people knew the truth. They couldn't storm the port. It would trigger a global conflict. They needed to extract the core technology, specifically, the reactor's control module and the cryptographic keys, without a trace. It was a mission that required not just a soldier, but a phantom, a master of infiltration, engineering, and psychological warfare. "There was one man," Sterling muttered, more to himself than to the senator on the phone. "One man who could do this. He designed half the damn systems on that boat. He could take it apart and put it back together in the dark with one hand." Another pause. "Who?" His name was codenamed Spectre. He led the Ghost Division. They didn't officially exist. He was a legend. A prodigy. MIT by 16, Field Command by 25. He could see systems, not just machines. He saw the connections, the weaknesses, the soul in the machine. The general stood up and began to pace the stone veranda, the phone pressed hard against his ear. What happened to him? 5 years ago, a mission went sideways. A miscalculation. Not his, but he took the fall. A data breach, a compromised asset. People died. Good people. He blamed himself. He walked away from it all. Dropped off the grid completely. We tried to find him, of course. 4 years. But the man who taught us how to be invisible. He used those lessons against us. He vanished. As far as the world is concerned, he doesn't exist. He stopped pacing and looked out at the dark water, his reflection a faint, troubled outline in the glass. We need a miracle, Senator. We need a ghost. And right now, I have neither. He ended the call, and stood there for a long moment, the cool night air doing little to soothe the fire in his gut. He was a man with all the power in the world, yet he was powerless. The solution to his impossible problem had existed, but was now lost, a ghost story whispered in the highest echelons of the Pentagon. He sighed, straightened his tuxedo jacket, and composed his features back into the pleasant mask of a wedding guest. It was time to rejoin the party, to pretend to celebrate love and new beginnings while the world teetered on the brink of chaos. He had no idea that his ghost, his miracle, was just 100 feet away, being cornered by the bar by a woman in a white dress, his quiet dignity being mistaken for shame. The party was in full swing. The band was playing a lively tune, and the dance floor was a swirling vortex of color and motion. Alex had found a relatively quiet spot near the bar, hoping to remain unnoticed for the rest of the night. But Tiffany seemed to have made him her personal project for the evening. She glided toward him, Mark trailing in her wake like a nervous puppy. She was holding 2 glasses of champagne, and she offered one to him with a smile that was all teeth. "Here you go, Alex," she said, her voice carrying over the music. "Don't be a stranger. You've been hiding in this corner all night. People will think you're not having fun." Alex took the glass, his fingers brushing hers. "I'm having a fine time." "It's a beautiful wedding it is, isn't it?" she said, taking a delicate sip from her own glass. Her eyes roamed over him again, that same condescending assessment. "So Mark was telling me you work with your hands. That must be so grounding. So real. Not like us, stuck in our offices and boardrooms, dealing with all this abstract money." She made it sound like a compliment, but it was wrapped in layers of dismissive pity. "I mean, what's it really like?" she pressed on, her voice taking on a tone of mock fascination. "Cleaning up after all those important, handsome cadets all day. Do you ever dream of being one of them? Of wearing one of those crisp white uniforms and having a future? It must be so hard, being on the outside looking in, always seeing what you can't have." The cruelty was so blatant, so exquisitely crafted, that it left Alex momentarily breathless. He looked at Mark, whose face was a mixture of shame and helplessness. His cousin wouldn't meet his gaze, instead finding something intensely interesting about the ice in his own drink. The silence stretched and Tiffany's smirk widened. She thought she had him. She thought she had stripped him bare, exposed him as the insignificant, low-status creature she believed him to be. Alex slowly lowered his champagne glass, his gaze never leaving hers. The quiet, humble man seemed to recede, and for a fleeting moment, something else looked out of his eyes. Something hard, ancient, and unbreakable. "The uniform doesn't make the man, Tiffany," he said, his voice quiet but resonant. "And a dream is only a dream until you decide to wake up." Tiffany blinked, momentarily thrown by the unexpected depth of his response. But she recovered quickly, letting out a tinkling, artificial laugh. "Oh, how profound. A philosopher janitor. Mark, your cousin is full of surprises." She turned to walk away, dismissing him with a flick of her wrist. "You enjoy your champagne, Alex. Don't drink it all in one place." She laughed again at her own joke, and pulled Mark toward the dance floor. Alex stood alone, the untouched glass of champagne in his hand. The knot in his stomach was no longer anger. It was a cold, quiet resolve. The game was almost over. He had paid his penance. He had lived in the shadows, cloaked in humility and anonymity. But a man can only be pushed so far. A hero can only hide for so long. And as he watched Tiffany preen and laugh on the dance floor, he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that before this night was over, she would learn exactly who he was. And she would learn that some people are invisible not because they are small, but because they are giants choosing to walk in the shade. The universe chose its moment with a dramatic flair that no screenwriter could have scripted. Just as the wedding planner was preparing for the grandest moment of the reception, a heartfelt video tribute to the happy couple featuring messages from friends and family around the world, including several of Mark's cousins deployed overseas, the world went dark. The music died with a mournful electronic groan. The shimmering fairy lights strung through the rafters blinked out. The massive video screens on either side of the stage went black. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom, followed by a nervous murmur. The emergency lights flickered on a moment later, casting the room in a sterile, unflattering orange glow. The magic was gone, replaced by a sudden, anxious reality. The wedding planner, a man with a perpetually stressed expression, began speaking frantically into his headset. "What do you mean, the main generator kicked? What about the backup? Tripped the main breaker? What does that even mean?" Panic began to creep into his voice. On the veranda, General Sterling, who had been about to step back inside, stopped dead. The power outage wasn't just an inconvenience for the party, the venue's communication systems were tied to the same grid. His secure line was dead. He was cut off. His frustration morphed into cold fury. He strode back into the ballroom, his eyes scanning the chaos. He saw the bride's father, a wealthy tech executive, arguing with the venue manager. "I paid for top-of-the-line everything. How can a brand-new generator fail?" The venue's hired technicians, two young men in matching polos, were huddled around a complex control panel set into the wall, their faces pale with panic. "The primary is fried, sir," one said, his voice trembling. And when it went, it sent a surge that blew the transfer switch. "The backup is on, but it's not routing to the main systems. It's like the whole grid is locked out, can you fix it?" the wedding planner shrieked. The tribute video. "There are soldiers from Afghanistan in that video. We can't just skip it." The other technician shook his head, wiping sweat from his brow. "The control board is a proprietary mess. A custom-built Crestron integration with a TR-400 series power management system. We don't have the schematics, let alone the override codes. We'd have to call the manufacturer, and that could take hours." Tiffany had rushed to her father's side, her face a mask of indignation. "Daddy, this is a disaster. My wedding is ruined," she wailed. Mark was trying to soothe her, but his words were lost in the growing din of confusion and complaint. Amid the chaos, Alex stood perfectly still. He wasn't looking at the panicked crowd. He was looking at the dead control panel. He recognized it. The TR-400 series. It was a notoriously powerful but temperamental system, often used in secure military installations because of its complex, hack-proof architecture. He had not only studied its schematics, he had helped write the foundational code for its diagnostic subroutines years ago. He watched the technicians fumble with the interface, trying to force a reboot that he knew would only compound the error. He saw the distress on the planner's face, heard the mention of the soldiers, and felt a familiar pull. The instinct to solve, to fix, to restore order. It was a part of him he had tried to bury, but it was waking up. Slowly, deliberately, he began to move. He walked from the shadows at the edge of the room toward the bright, panicked center of the crisis. He moved with a quiet purpose that went unnoticed by the frantic, gesticulating crowd. He was just the janitor, the maintenance man, a piece of the background scenery. No one paid him any mind as he stopped just behind the two struggling technicians. He listened for a moment to their frantic, incorrect theories. "Maybe if we bypass the primary bus, no, that'll trip the fire suppression." Then he spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it was calm and clear, cutting through the noise with effortless authority. "You're wasting your time," he said. The two technicians turned and stared at him, their expressions a mixture of annoyance and confusion. "Who are you?" one of them snapped. "Look, pal, we've got this," said the other, turning back to the panel. Alex ignored them. His eyes were fixed on the panel's small diagnostic screen, which was flashing a series of error codes he could read like a child's nursery rhyme. "The issue isn't the primary inverter, and it's not the transfer switch," he stated, his tone matter-of-fact. "The initial surge caused a cascade failure in the tertiary power relays, which triggered a logic fault in the phase synchronization protocols for the backup capacitor. You're trying to fix the symptom, not the disease." The two technicians just stared at him, their mouths slightly agape. The technical jargon, delivered with such confident precision, was so far beyond their pay grade they couldn't even process it. Tiffany, who had overheard, let out a sharp, scornful laugh. "Oh, for heaven's sake! Are you really going to listen to the janitor? What would he know about it? He probably thinks a capacitor is something you drink." But her father, the tech executive, had gone quiet. He was looking at Alex, a flicker of something, not respect but professional curiosity, in his eyes. The jargon was accurate, if esoteric. General Sterling, drawn by the commotion, had also moved closer. He stood at the edge of the small group, his arms crossed, his gaze intense. He was listening, and a strange sense of familiarity was prickling at the back of his mind. The terminology, the calm diagnostic approach in the midst of chaos, it reminded him of someone. Someone from a past he thought was buried. Alex paid them no mind. He reached past the stunned technicians and his fingers danced over the touchscreen interface, which they had been unable to even unlock. He entered a 32-character alphanumeric override code from memory, and the screen flickered to life, displaying a complex diagnostic schematic of the building's entire power grid. "Get me a multi-tool, and a length of copper wire. 12 gauge will do," he said to the technicians, not as a request, but as a command. "And someone kill the main breaker to the backup generator." Now the second technician, jolted into action by the sheer force of Alex's authority, scrambled to obey. The first one hesitated, looking at the bride's father for guidance. The executive gave a short, sharp nod. "Do what he says." Alex took the multi-tool, and with the deft, economical movements of a surgeon, opened a small service panel below the main screen. Inside was a chaotic nest of wires and circuit boards. To the others, it was incomprehensible. To Alex, it was a language he understood perfectly. "The logic fault has the system trapped in a recursive loop," he explained, his voice calm as he worked. "It keeps trying to protect itself from a power surge that's already over. I have to create a temporary bridge to bypass the corrupted logic gate and force the system to recognize the stable power from the backup." His hands moved with a blur of speed and precision, stripping a wire, rerouting a connection, tightening a terminal. He wasn't just fixing a machine, he was communicating with it. There was a grace to his movements, an innate understanding that was mesmerizing to watch. Tiffany watched, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of sour disbelief. She couldn't understand what was happening, only that the lowly cousin she had been mocking all night was now the center of attention, holding the fate of her perfect wedding in his grimy hands. After a few moments of intense, silent work, Alex stepped back. "Okay," he said. "Turn the breaker back on." The technician complied. There was a loud clunk from down the hall, followed by a hum that grew steadily in volume. A single green light blinked on the control panel. Then another. And another. Suddenly, with a soft whoosh, the main lights in the ballroom flooded the room with brilliant, warm light. The music swelled back to life. The giant screens on the stage flickered on, displaying the smiling faces of Mark and Tiffany. The crisis was over. A wave of relieved applause and cheers erupted through the room. The wedding planner looked like he was about to weep with joy. The technicians stared at the panel, and then at Alex, with a look of pure, unadulterated awe. How did you do that?" one of them stammered. "The override code. The bypass. That's not in any manual." Alex simply wiped his hands on a napkin he pulled from his pocket, his work done. "Some things aren't," he said quietly. He turned to walk away, ready to retreat back into the shadows, his task complete. But he didn't get more than 2 steps. A hand, firm and heavy, landed on his shoulder. "Hold on a minute," a low, powerful voice said. Alex stopped and turned. He found himself looking into the piercing, intelligent eyes of General Sterling. The general's face was no longer just curious. It was a maelstrom of dawning recognition, of disbelief warring with a sudden, electrifying certainty. He wasn't looking at Alex's worn suit, or his calloused hands anymore. He was looking at his face, at the calm authority in his eyes, at the way he held himself, not with the deference of a handyman, but with the quiet confidence of a commander. "I've seen that before," Sterling said, his voice barely a whisper, meant only for Alex. "The way you diagnose that cascade failure. The specific terminology you used. Recursive logic fault in the phase synchronization protocols, that's classified language. That's from the Prometheus project." He leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing as if trying to see through years of shadow and disguise. "There was a briefing, years ago. A young officer, a prodigy, explaining the vulnerabilities of our secure infrastructure. He used those exact words. He was the only one who talked about systems having a disease, instead of a malfunction." The pieces were clicking into place in the general's mind, forming a picture he hadn't dared to imagine. The ghost he had been mourning, the legend he had been searching for. He looked from Alex's face to his hands, which were now still, and then back to his eyes. The quiet humility he had seen earlier now looked like something else entirely, control. The invisibility now looked like a deliberate choice. "The schematics for the TR-400, Sterling continued, his voice tight with emotion. "They were designed by a special projects group. Code name, Ghost Division. Their commander. He was a ghost himself. A phantom. His identity was erased from almost every record." He paused, his gaze boring into Alex. "I know you," he said, the words no longer a question, but a statement of fact. "I never saw your face clearly, the files were heavily redacted. But I heard your voice. I heard you speak. And I'm hearing you now." The noise of the party seemed to fade into a dull roar around them. The world shrank to the space between these two men, one representing the pinnacle of power, the other a man who had walked away from it all. Tiffany, seeing the 4-star general giving her dirt-poor cousin his undivided attention, could not stand it. The order of her world was being upended. The janitor was being treated like a VIP, and she, the bride, the queen of the day, was being ignored. She strode over, her white dress rustling like angry leaves, a furious and artificial smile plastered on her face. She looped her arm through Alex's, a gesture that was both possessive and dismissive, as if to pull him back down to his proper place. "General, you are so sweet to thank my cousin," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "He's surprisingly handy for a maintenance man. All that practice plugging and unplugging things, I suppose." She laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. She turned her back slightly on the general to face Alex, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial, cruel whisper. "You're enjoying your little moment in the spotlight, aren't you? Fixing some wires. Don't get used to it. The party's over. Now run along and let the important people talk." She gave his arm a little push, expecting him to scuttle away, back to his corner. But Alex didn't move. He stood his ground, a rock against which her petty arrogance broke. General Sterling watched the exchange, his face unreadable, but a muscle was twitching in his cheek. He knew. He was almost certain. He just needed the final confirmation. Tiffany, frustrated by Alex's refusal to be dismissed, grew bolder. The attention of the general had made her feel powerful, and she wanted to put this upstart cousin firmly in his place, once and for all. "Honestly, Alex," she said, her voice rising so that several nearby guests turned to look. "Who do you think you are? You fix a fuse box and suddenly you think you're somebody. You're a janitor who got lucky. That's all you are, and that's all you'll ever be." The words, meant to be the final, crushing blow, hung in the suddenly quiet air. Mark, who had come up behind her, looked horrified. The bride's father looked embarrassed. But Alex just looked calm. The storm had finally broken. The years of silence, of penance, were over. He slowly, deliberately, removed her hand from his arm. He didn't look angry. He looked weary. Like a giant tired of being pestered by insects. He finally turned his full attention to her, and for the first time that night, he let her see. He dropped the mask of the humble maintenance man, the quiet cousin, the invisible guest. He stood up straighter, and the subtle shift in his posture changed everything. The humility was gone, replaced by an aura of command so potent, so absolute, that it was almost a physical force. The air crackled around him. He wasn't just a man in a worn suit anymore. He was something more. Something terrifying. His eyes, which had been downcast and mild all evening, now blazed with a cold, brilliant light. They were the eyes of a man who had seen things Tiffany couldn't imagine, made decisions that would break lesser men, and carried burdens that would crush a nation. He looked first at General Sterling, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. A confirmation. "It's been a long time, sir," Alex said, his voice now devoid of its earlier quietness. It was the voice of a commander, crisp, clear, and resonant. It was a voice that expected to be obeyed. The general's eyes widened, all doubt vanishing. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Spectre," he breathed, the name a ghost on his lips. Alex then turned his gaze back to Tiffany. She flinched, taking an involuntary step back. She had never been looked at like this in her life. It was like being weighed, measured, and found utterly, hopelessly wanting. The entire ballroom seemed to have gone silent. The band had stopped playing. The guests were frozen, their champagne glasses halfway to their lips, all eyes fixed on the drama unfolding by the stage. "You asked me who I think I am," Alex said, his voice slicing through the silence. Each word was delivered with precise, devastating calm. "You've judged me all night on my suit, on my job, on the dirt you imagine is on my hands. You built a little story in your head, and you decided that's who I am." He took a step toward her, and she took another step back. "You see this suit, and you see a failure. You see these hands, and you see a laborer. You look at me and you see nothing." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle upon her, upon the entire, rapt audience. "You wanted to know what I do. You wanted to know who I am. Fine. The night for secrets is over." He looked past her, his eyes meeting his cousin Mark's, a flicker of profound disappointment in his gaze. Then he looked back at the pale, trembling woman in the white dress. "Ma'am, to answer your question," he said, his voice dropping slightly but losing none of its power. "The name is Alex Ryder. And the rank is Vice Admiral." The silence that followed was not empty. It was a physical thing, a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. It was the sound of 100 realities shattering at once. "Vice Admiral." The words echoed in the cavernous ballroom, seeming to hang in the air like smoke. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then, Tiffany made a sound. It was a choked, gurgling noise, halfway between a gasp and a sob. Her perfectly made-up face had gone a ghastly, chalky white. Her eyes, wide with horror and disbelief, were locked on Alex. She brought a hand to her throat as if she were physically choking, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water, but no sound came out. The scorn, the arrogance, the smug superiority, it had all vanished, burned away by 2 words. She staggered backward, bumping into a small table and sending a glass crashing to the floor. The sound broke the spell. A wave of murmurs and whispers rippled through the crowd. "Vice Admiral." Did he say Admiral? But the suit. He said he was in maintenance. Mark looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His face was a canvas of shock, guilt, and dawning, horrifying comprehension. The cousin he had allowed his fiancée to mock, the man he had been ashamed of, was one of the highest-ranking officers in the entire United States Navy. The quiet, humble maintenance man held a rank that commanded fleets, that answered only to the president and the highest echelons of the Pentagon. General Sterling stepped forward, breaking through the stunned onlookers. He ignored Tiffany completely, his eyes only for Alex. He clasped Alex's shoulder, his grip firm, and his expression one of profound relief and respect. "Admiral Ryder," he said, his voice loud and clear for all to hear, cementing the reality of it. "We thought you were dead." The official record. It said you were lost in the training incident 5 years ago, a cover story, General, Alex replied, his voice level. "I needed to disappear. It was the only way we know," Sterling said, his voice grim. "We know it wasn't your fault. We've spent 5 years trying to find you. Spectre. God, it's good to see you." The general's public use of the code name sent another shockwave through the few guests who understood its significance. The bride's father, the tech executive, stared at Alex with a new, profound respect. He knew what Spectre meant in the world of Black Ops and advanced military tech. He was looking at a living legend. The general pulled Alex a few feet away, his expression shifting from relief to urgent business. The wedding, the party, it had all become an irrelevant backdrop. "Alex, we have a situation. A critical one." The Chimera, Alex's eyes sharpened. "What about it?" "They have it," Sterling said in a low, intense voice. "It's in their hands. We need the core module and the crypto keys back before they can crack them. It's an impossible mission. We need a ghost." Alex's gaze didn't waver. The years of quiet penance fell away completely, and the commander re-emerged, fully formed. "Where and when?" he asked. The question was not if he would do it. It was a simple, pragmatic request for orders. He was back. Tiffany, meanwhile, had stumbled away, her perfect wedding day in ruins around her. But the disaster had nothing to do with the power outage and everything to do with her own shattered pride. She found a chair in a dark corner and collapsed into it, her body trembling. Every cruel word, every mocking laugh, every condescending smile she had aimed at Alex now replayed in her mind, each one a fresh wave of mortifying shame. She hadn't just insulted her fiancé's cousin. She had mocked a national hero. A vice admiral. In front of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Her social standing, her carefully constructed world of status and superiority, had been annihilated in a single sentence. Her fiancé, Mark, finally found his voice and his courage. He approached Alex, his face pale and etched with shame. "Alex. I am so sorry," he stammered, his voice cracking. I stood there. I let her. I didn't say anything." Alex turned to look at his cousin. The fire in his eyes had softened, replaced by a deep, profound disappointment that was far more cutting than any anger. "It wasn't about her, Mark," Alex said, his voice quiet again, but heavy with meaning. "It was about you. You saw a suit, not a man. You saw a job, not your family. Respect isn't something you give to a uniform or a title. It's something you're supposed to give to a person, regardless of who you think they are. That's a lesson you still need to learn." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words landed with the force of a physical blow. Mark flinched, tears welling in his eyes. He had failed a test he didn't even know he was taking. Alex turned back to the general, the family drama already fading from his focus. A new mission was before him. A country to serve. "Give me the details, General," he said. "I'll need a secure channel and a transport." As Alex and General Sterling walked toward the exit, carving a path through the stunned and silent guests, the crowd parted for them as if for royalty. He was no longer the invisible man, the ghost at the feast. He was a figure of immense power and purpose, his worn suit now looking less like a mark of poverty, and more like the unassuming disguise of a king, who had been walking among his people. He was seen. Truly, finally seen. The last thing he saw as he left the ballroom was Tiffany, a small, broken figure in a big white dress, her face buried in her hands. She had wanted a perfect wedding, and in a way, she had gotten one. It had been a perfect, unforgettable lesson in humility. A black, unmarked sedan pulled up to the manor's entrance, its engine a low, powerful hum. Alex Rider, Vice Admiral, stepped out of the world of shimmering lights and into the darkness, where he was most at home. He was leaving the party behind, but he was returning to his life, to his purpose. The man who had been a ghost was about to go hunting. That day, a woman who judged by the surface was drowned by the depths of a truth she could not comprehend. She saw a janitor, a maintenance man, a nobody. She was blind to the hero, the leader, the legend standing right in front of her. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? That a person's true worth is never found in their job title, the car they drive, or the price tag of their suit. It's found in their character, in their integrity, in the quiet dignity of a soul who knows their value, even when the rest of the world is blind to it. We live in a world that is so quick to label, to categorize, to dismiss. We build boxes for people and get angry when they refuse to stay inside. But the most extraordinary people are often the ones who defy categorization. They are the quiet ones, the humble ones, the ones working in the shadows, not for applause, but for a purpose greater than themselves. So never underestimate the person standing next to you. Never judge a book by its worn and dusty cover. The quietest person in the room might just have the most powerful story to tell. They might just be the one who holds the light that everyone else is searching for. Everyone deserves to be seen for who they are, not for what we assume them to be. If this story reminded you of the power of humility and the poison of pride, share it with someone who needs to hear that message today. And comment below with a time you witnessed someone's true, hidden worth shine through when it was least expected. Because in every quiet corner, in every overlooked soul, there is a giant waiting for their moment. Remind someone today that you see them. Truly see them.